What's the most ultimate petty revenge you've seen or been a part of? Story 1. I used to work at a pizzeria. There was this one customer that everyone hated. She was incredibly rude, complained about everything. Every single order she ever received, she found something to complain about. And she wasn't a normal customer, no. She would essentially order groceries from us by requesting disassembled sandwiches. For example, she'd order a chicken sandwich, but with all the ingredients separate and in very specific amounts. With cutlery, butter, a side of grated cheese, 3 plates, oil and vinegar on the side, medium rare toasted bread, whatever that's supposed to mean, extra packets of ranch, you get the idea. But because it was all technically part of a sandwich, she didn't expect to be charged for any of the extras and would complain. She also refused to answer the door when delivery drivers arrived and instead left money in an envelope, exact change, no tip, under the doormat, expecting the driver to leave the food on her doorstep. She had strange rules about where the driver could park. Never in her driveway, only on the street, even when it was raining, or she'd complain. And she didn't want them to announce their arrival in any way. No knocking, no ringing the bell, no car horn, total silence, or she'd complain. She was an absolute nightmare. And every time she complained, she'd try to get free stuff out of us for next time. Because of course she would. Anyway, one day she said the driver needed to make change and that he should leave the change in the envelope and not take a tip because he gets paid already. So I told my driver and he said, "Oh, I get paid, do I? No problem, I'll take care of it." He went on the delivery and came back grinning, didn't say a word about how he took care of it. I got distracted, kept working, and 10 minutes later I got a phone call. It was the same customer, absolutely furious, because apparently my driver had left her the correct change of $5.85 in the envelope like she asked, in pennies. Genius. I had to put her on hold so I could laugh. I got back on the phone and said, "Ma'am, I think you'll find that pennies are legal tender. There's nothing I can do." After explaining that I was, in fact, the manager and the highest authority available, she got fed up and hung up on me. That driver is still an absolute legend to me. Story 2. My little brother and his girlfriend came to stay at my house for the weekend, and the girlfriend was incredibly self-centered and obnoxious. When they left, she forgot her clothes and toiletries because she had left them sprawled all over my bathroom. About a week later, she and my brother moved into an apartment together. After he paid for the moving truck, deposit, and utilities, she cheated on him with her ex and kicked him out of the apartment. This left him broke, homeless, and heartbroken. In the days following the breakup, she kept calling and emailing him several times a day, demanding that he ask me to ship her clothes and toiletries back to her. I mean, it's really important. It's my North Face. My brother called and pleaded with me to send them so she would stop having a reason to contact him. Being the loving sister that I am, I gathered up the really important North Face sweatshirt, shorts, underwear, shampoo, conditioner, soap, and razor. I folded everything neatly. I then wrote a polite note apologizing for the delay in mailing them and said I hoped all was well. The note was written in permanent marker, and the paper happened to be resting on the really important North Face when I wrote it. Unfortunately, the ink bled straight through the paper and onto the shirt. Also, unfortunately, the shampoo, soap, and conditioner caps were not tightly secured on their bottles, and the contents leaked all over the clothes, further spreading the ink. The most unfortunate part, however, was that her razor didn't have any sort of protective cap or container and left small slashes all over the front of the really important North Face. She received the package, and my brother never heard from her again. Story 3. Every year I go away for 2 to 3 weeks to work in a different location. One summer, during my rotation, my usual supervisor took some time off. To cover the 3 weeks, they brought in someone from outside our group to supervise. I was working extremely hard, doing my own work and what should have been the supervisor's responsibilities. We were set up in a temporary office with no connection to the outside world. We had plenty of work to keep us quite busy. The supervisor's day, however, consisted of playing solitaire on the computer all day and then yelling for an hour at the end of each day that the work wasn't getting done fast enough. 2.5 weeks in, I'd had enough. I deleted the shortcut for solitaire from her desktop. Pandemonium broke out. She completely lost her mind. I had to swear that I didn't delete any programs from her computer, which was completely true. I watched her over the next few days as she did anything and everything to try to get an internet connection so she could download Solitaire. She even tried to get AOL working on the machine so she could dial up and get it. Story 4. I lived in a cheap, rundown apartment with roommates, and we all worked in fast food. Money was tight. One roommate ended up unemployed for a few weeks, but then got a job as a bank teller, making much better money. However, while unemployed, she had missed a rent payment, which we had scraped together to cover for her. 2 weeks into her new job, she got her first paycheck. Naturally, we expected her to pay us back right away. On the first day, she said something along the lines of not being able to do personal business, cash her check, during work, so she'd pay us in a couple of days. That Friday, when she was supposed to pay us, she came home with a big shopping bag and casually mentioned that she couldn't pay the back rent yet because she had to buy new work clothes. When my roommates and I got upset, she went full attitude on us, saying we didn't understand how to work a professional job because we were only food service, and basically told us we'd get our money when she felt like giving it. That weekend, she misplaced her name tag, which was required at work. She spent hours searching for it. At some point, I found the name tag in a random spot and said nothing. She kept searching all weekend and was panicked that she would look bad to her boss. I never moved or took the name tag, but the entire time I knew exactly where it was. She never found it and had to get a new one. She also never paid the back rent, and we kicked her out a few weeks later. Story 5. During my freshman year of high school, I was in a biology class that was mostly made up of juniors. One guy who sat next to me was always a jerk during class. I always did well on the tests, so he would constantly look over and copy answers from my Scantron. I'm pretty sure he didn't realize that I knew he was cheating off of me. Well, one day I got fed up with him messing with me and copying my answers. The next test comes around, and sure enough, he starts copying again. I finish the test, and so does he. He gets up, turns in his test, and returns to his seat. I looked him straight in the eyes and proceeded to erase my entire Scantron. Then I retook the test, this time marking all the correct answers. The look of panic in his eyes was absolutely satisfying. He ended up getting a 2% on that test and never cheated off me again. Story 6. This isn't my story, but a friend's experience during his time in the military. He received a care package from his grandparents, 7 pounds of homemade fudge and cookies, but he immediately had to leave on a long mission, about 2 months long. He told his bunkmates to wait until he returned, and then he'd share everything. When he got back, there was less than a pound left. There was some initial outrage, but he stayed calm. And if you knew him, you'd rather see him angry than calm, because that's when he was plotting revenge. Weeks and months passed. Finally, he was scheduled to be in the same vehicle as the guys who ate his fudge. The night before, he ate 2 boxes of Oreos and drank a gallon of milk, knowing full well he was lactose intolerant. His head was sticking out the top hatch of the vehicle, and he made a seal with his belt and gear. Just as they got too far out to return, he let loose the most vile, sickening flatulence imaginable. He was happy to quite literally ruin his own pants. The guys inside ended up vomiting all over the vehicle and later had to pay him back the market value of the fudge, which he sadly never got to taste again. His grandmother passed away before she could make more. Story 7. When I was a senior in high school, I was in a group English project with 2 other people. We had to read an assigned book, and over the course of about a month, we had several mini projects to complete before the final presentation. These mini projects were designed so that each person would cover a different section of the book, and they would all be combined for the final presentation. The night before the first mini project was due, I found out that neither of my group members planned to put any real effort into the assignment beyond spark notes and random filler. I ended up pulling several all-nighters just to make sure we would pass. Fast forward to the day of our final presentation. We were the last group to present, which meant we would go right after the lunch break. What I hadn't told anyone was that I was going to donate blood at the school blood drive during lunch. I went, donated, and spent a few minutes making sure I wouldn't pass out afterward. I returned to the classroom and found my group halfway through the précis I had created. Apparently, they had been floundering, making things up on the spot, and making it obvious they hadn't read the book or knew what was going on. The teacher had her head in her hands. I walked in, and my group said, "Oh, thank God he's back." I restarted the précis, gave the presentation, and took my seat. After class, I explained everything to the teacher. I got a passing grade. I'm 90% sure they failed. Story 8. My boss paged me on my wedding night. Yeah, bad on me for leaving the pager on. But in my defense, it automatically turned on after charging, and I wanted a full battery before leaving on my honeymoon. He did it as a joke, but it came at a really inappropriate moment. We had a page only if something's on fire policy, so I had to call in, even though I had just gotten married and was about to leave for 2 weeks. When he answered, he laughed so hard that I had to get him back. So when I returned, I programmed the mail servers to call out on their phone lines and hit his pager with dial-back numbers for phone service ads. At 4 a.m. every day. One day, his wife got to the pager before he did and saw a message like, "I loved how you described what you do to me, Jerry. Call back when your wife's gone." She was not amused. She thought he had been calling those services behind her back and gave him a serious talking to. He knew it was me, but he was too stubborn to ask me to stop. So it kept going for weeks until he finally figured out where the script was running from and used it to page me instead. We had a back-and-forth pager war for a while, but it all went wrong when there was a real data center emergency and one of us ignored the page, thinking it was another prank. That ended the fun. Story 9. I occasionally deliver pizza as a part-time job. There's one customer who always pays with a big bag of change. And I don't mean quarters. I mean a bag full of dimes, nickels, and pennies. Since his order usually costs around $20, the bag often weighs several pounds. It's a complete hassle to count all that change. So most drivers just assume he's got the correct amount and leave. Usually he's just barely over or has the exact amount. I don't think it's innocent either. He always hands over the bag with a smug grin. It's such a pain that most drivers know his address by heart and try to avoid delivering to him if they can. One night, I was already in a bad mood, and by luck of the draw, got assigned to his house. I remembered a post on r/petty revenge, where someone used a similar situation to get a little revenge, and I decided to go for it. I pulled up to his house and left the pizza in the car. I rang the doorbell, and sure enough, he answered holding that heavy bag of change. He asked where his pizza was, and I replied, "New policy, sir. We have to count the change before handing over the food." So I sat down right on his doorstep and started counting. At one point, I even asked if he could turn on his porch light because I was having trouble seeing. He ended up sitting there while I counted every coin. It took about 10 minutes. He was about $1 over, so I started picking out pennies to give him his change back, and he said I could keep the rest as a tip. When I finally gave him the pizza, he sheepishly apologized and shut the door. The whole exchange was incredibly awkward, and as far as I know, he hasn't ordered from us since. Story 10. This was a case of petty revenge pulled on me by a friend and executed flawlessly. Back in the late 90s and early 2000s, my friends and I had this running prank where we'd send each other links that were supposed to be photos of us hanging out or something interesting, but they'd actually be images of plant stands. It got so bad that we stopped trusting any link and even coined the term, "Don't plant stand me." The prank flared up over the years, even as friends moved away from New York City and spread out across the country. We'd still share pictures and funny links. I don't even remember what I did exactly, but I plant-standed one of them particularly badly at one point. Fast forward about a year. I'm getting married. Everyone's invited, including that same friend who planned to stay at my place during the wedding. She arrives in a rental car and asked me to help carry her bags inside. I was so happy to see her that I grabbed a couple and brought them into the guest room. It was a great wedding, and afterward, my wife and I left for our honeymoon, saying our goodbyes to everyone. About a week later, back home, I went to grab something from the closet in the guest room. That's when I saw it, a huge wrought iron plant stand smack in the middle of the room. That friend had found, bought, disassembled, flown to another country with, reassembled, and left a plant stand in my guest room, and I had helped carry it into my own house. Needless to say, she won. We don't plant stand anymore. There's just no topping that. Story 11. I used to work with people who were completely tech illiterate. One woman in particular would talk on her personal cell phone all day, while my coworker and I did all the work, on her time. We complained to our supervisors, but nothing was going to change. She was part of the in crowd. One day I decided to take a small, petty revenge. I turned off her middle monitor. We each used 3. Just left it blank. Nothing drastic, just a little move to feel like I had some control. Working 11-hour days with someone who could help but refused to do anything was exhausting, and I wanted at least one tiny win. The next day, I kid you not, 4 people were at her desk trying to figure it out. She started an hour before me. I chuckled, took my seat, and got to work since our presentation had to be done by lunch. I got everything finished and ready to go. Meanwhile, they were still at her desk. It had been 6 hours at that point. I figured something must be seriously wrong and walked over to help. The middle monitor was still off, and they were now talking with our in-house IT team. They had replaced the cable and were about to order a brand new monitor. At that point, I asked if anyone had tried turning it on. They all looked at each other, then at me. "Of course it's on," they said. So I reached over and hit the power button. Boom, it turned on and displayed everything perfectly. I was so disappointed, but also extremely proud. Story 12. I had an ex-roommate whose girlfriend over time just started living at our house and refused to contribute to rent or utilities. This was despite multiple conversations about how splitting the cost between all of us would be more fair. There were 3 of us living there before she started freeloading. Each month, the utility bills went up, which really frustrated me because they were in my name. The house had 1 garage and a double-wide driveway. My roommates and I had a parking plan based on who left for work at what time, but the girlfriend started parking in my space, leaving me to park on the street and throwing off our entire arrangement. She also ruined a few pots and pans my mom had given me by using metal utensils on them and then leaving them in the sink to get rusty. After a while, she stopped socializing altogether and just stayed in his room constantly. We ended up getting mice because she was keeping food in the bedroom. The final straw for me was discovering that she had been using my cosmetics, even though she had her own. I ended up getting pink eye because she wouldn't stop using my makeup, even after I removed it all from the bathroom. My petty revenge, I urinated in her shampoo. Not just a little, I made sure to get nice and dehydrated, filled a solo cup, and poured the whole thing into her bulk-size shampoo bottle, then shook it up. This happened years ago, and it still gets me riled up like nothing else. No regrets. Story 13. This happened a couple of years ago when I was in college. My friend, we'll call her Susie, and I were both going into our second year. So was her boyfriend Brad, his real name, because honestly, forget you Brad. Susie found out she had herpes. The only person she had ever been with was Brad. Naturally, she was devastated. That's when we discovered he had been cheating on her, and that she wasn't the only one infected. We found out about at least 5 other women. What's worse, Brad had known he was positive and was still hooking up with people while lying and saying he was healthy. His attitude was basically, someone gave it to me, so why shouldn't I give it to others? Brad was a textbook example of selfish and careless. Susie was heartbroken and stuck dealing with a life-altering health condition. One night we were watching TV and saw this urban legend where a woman got revenge on a cheating ex by hiding shrimp in his curtain rods. Unfortunately, Brad had 5 roommates, so we couldn't target the apartment without affecting others. But then we remembered, Brad had a car, and Brad couldn't afford to get a new one anytime soon. Susie still knew the door code, and I happened to know how to remove interior vehicle panels, including the ones where it would be almost impossible to retrieve something once hidden inside. Lucky for us, Brad worked the early shift on Wednesdays, and it was Tuesday night. So we hit the store and bought out the clearance section, ground beef, shrimp, imitation crab meat, fish, and deviled eggs. Oh, and it was September, and we were in the middle of a triple-digit heat wave. Late that night, when it was still around 90 degrees, we went to work. Brad lived in a rundown apartment complex with no security cameras and neighbors, who didn't care what we were doing at 1 a.m. Sure enough, the door code still worked. We popped off the small covers in the interior door panels and stuffed them with shrimp. Then we removed the plastic from the wheel wells and filled them with ground beef and eggs. Then came the liftgate. You get the idea. We reassembled everything and left. Over the next few days, the smell got progressively worse. The apartment manager asked Brad to move his car off the property because of the stench. Our town also had a gang of aggressive feral cats who loved hanging around his vehicle. So not only did the car smell awful, but Brad also risked being attacked by feral cats anytime he got near it. He even had to keep the windows cracked at all times. The best part? Brad and I had the same major. I saw him all the time over the next 3 years. He became infamous for his disgusting car. He couldn't afford to replace it. No one would buy it. And no matter how many times he cleaned it, the smell never went away. No one could figure out where it was coming from. Even if they had, most of the panels would have had to be replaced just to access the mess. To this day, people still ask him about the smell on Facebook. If he offers to give someone a ride, they ask if it's in the same car. Nope. Still the stink mobile. He currently works at Starbucks, so that car isn't going anywhere anytime soon, just like his herpes. I like to think of it as my ultimate Sherlock Holmes level petty revenge. I will never top this. It was my masterpiece. Story 14. My uncle took revenge on the FedEx guy who regularly picks up deliveries from his stoneworking business. He produces things like headstones, address stones, name bricks, etc. A single order address stone is about an 18 by 4-inch block of limestone. Usually, we individually box the stones, load them onto a pallet, and bring it to the back of the FedEx truck using a forklift. The delivery man just slides the boxes into his truck. One day, FedEx showed up early and in a bad mood, and the driver left in a bit of a fit before we could finish boxing all of the stones. We missed delivery deadlines, and my uncle was furious. So the next day before FedEx arrived, always the same guy, my uncle flipped open the forklift's engine panel and told us to act like it was broken. He also said we shouldn't help the delivery man load the boxes. I don't remember how many boxed stones he had to deal with, but I do remember that by the time he was done dragging them across the warehouse and into his truck, he was out of breath and drenched in sweat. Story 15. My roommate in college was incredibly selfish. I've known him since preschool and we're still friends, but he's definitely not someone you want to live with. He was attending a local tech school that's meant to be a pathway into the main university, which our third roommate and I attended. But instead of going to class, he just got high and played Xbox all day on my Xbox, which is where this story begins. He often had friends over who would hang out, get high, and play Xbox in the living room. I don't like having a TV in my room, so I had set up my flat screen and Xbox there for communal use. It's worth mentioning that both he and our third roommate had their own Xbox consoles too, but they kept them in their rooms. When the latest Call of Duty game came out, we spent hours playing together as a squad, until the third roommate's Xbox got the red ring of death. Shortly after, mine did too. We thought no problem. Our selfish roommate had the newer Xbox 360 that wasn't prone to that issue. So we asked to move his to the living room so we could all keep playing together. His response? Nah, I don't want people playing it all the time. It'll probably break. Plus, what if you guys are playing it and I want to use it? We were livid after all the time he spent using my stuff. He couldn't return the favor. At the time, I had supplied the router for the house, which meant I alone had the admin password. I found out I could block specific MAC addresses. Guess who couldn't connect to Xbox Live anymore? I started turning off his access sporadically over the next few weeks. I later learned he had spent 4 hours on the phone with both Time Warner and Microsoft trying to troubleshoot the issue. Eventually, he began to connect the dots about when it would cut off and when it came back. But I didn't stop. I adapted. I found out I could open a port to remotely access the router. I had a BlackBerry at the time, yes I know, which could load the HTML router configuration page. So I started cutting off his Xbox access even when I wasn't home. I was even out of town at our rival school once and shut him down from 3 hours away. To this day, he still doesn't know it was me. I still visit him on weekends, and we hang out like nothing ever happened. Story 16. A few years ago, I was on a stag weekend and sharing a room with my friend. I know what he's like, so I was already suspicious of him messing with my stuff. The first morning, after way too many drinks the night before, I went to brush my teeth. I hadn't brushed the night before because I passed out. I inspected my toothbrush. It had dark, curly hairs embedded in it. Not a lot, but just enough to raise alarm. There was also a brown tinge on the bristles. I knew exactly what he'd done. I tossed the toothbrush in the bin, picked up his, and gave myself some revenge by using it to scrub myself thoroughly. Yes, down there. Then I cleaned the brush, wiped the hairs off, and did my best to brush my own teeth with toothpaste and my finger. I exited the bathroom, and though he didn't say a word, the smug look on his face confirmed everything. I kept quiet and started getting dressed as he walked in to brush his teeth. To this day, he's never mentioned it. He probably still laughs to himself, thinking he got one over on me. Meanwhile, I'm the one really laughing. Story 17. This one might be a bit long, but here it goes. I'm in the Navy, and on my first ship, I had a close group of friends. Two of them decided to take a trip to Ohio, so they requested time off and got it approved. They were just about to book flights when another sailor overheard their plans and offered to drive them, since he was supposedly going the same way. On the day of leave, my friends were packed and ready. The other sailor said he'd meet them at the pier to pick them up. I was hanging out with them because I was off that day but leaving soon. 2 hours passed. They got a call saying he was running late, maybe an hour. 5 hours later, they gave up and booked last-minute flights, which cost them $300 to $400 more. For E3s, that was a serious hit. The guy finally met up with them later and gave some long, ridiculous excuse. Technically, he didn't break any rules, but he really screwed them over. I already didn't like him. He smelled bad, wasn't reliable, and I shared a bunk area with him. I slept directly under him. One day while out at sea, I had had enough. I decided to switch one of his socks with mine, but not just any sock, one I used for my private time. It had been used, dried, and stored for about 3 days. After he fell asleep, I took his shoe, shook out his sock, and replaced it with mine. Then I set my alarm for when he usually woke up. Sure enough, he got up, went to the bathroom, and got ready for his watch. He pulled the sock out of his shoe, noticed something odd, and actually brought it to his mouth and nose to smell. It touched his lips. He made a face but still put the sock on and went to stand a 12-hour watch. I didn't tell anyone at first, but later when he went unauthorized absence and never came back, I told my friends what I did. They were thrilled. Story 18. When I was a teenager, I made the dumb decision to let this kid I knew borrow a good chunk of money. I expected to be paid back the next day, but he ignored my calls and texts. I even went to his workplace, which also happened to be where I got my daily coffee. After months of excuses, something about his house, his mom, his buddies, even his dog, I finally had enough. I stopped at a Family Dollar, bought a jar of peanut butter, then went next door to a cafe and grabbed a plastic knife. It was time for revenge. I found his car behind his workplace. It was unlocked. I spread peanut butter under all 4 door handles, inside and out, behind the window switches, the steering wheel, the shifter, the volume knob, basically every possible surface I could think of that wasn't in direct line of sight. Right before closing, I went downtown and grabbed a discreet seat with a perfect view of his car. The moment he reached for the door handle and jerked his hand back in disgust, I felt pure satisfaction. I couldn't see the interior well, but I could see him flailing his arms around. It was beautiful. Later, he called me and asked if I had anything to do with all the sticky stuff in his car. I calmly responded, "Do you have anything to do with that money I was owed?" I got my money a couple days later. Story 19. Many years ago, when I was in high school, I used to go off campus for lunch every day and return to class with a soda. There was this one kid who thought it was hilarious to swipe my drink whenever I wasn't looking. After a while, that got real old. I'm normally a Coke drinker, but I switched it up and started bringing back Orange Crush to put a plan in motion. One evening, I went home and filled a water bottle with water and a healthy dose of Dave's Insanity sauce, trying to match the color to Orange Crush. The next day, I poured the mixture into a soda cup. The kid didn't grab it right away as usual, but I had an oral report that day, and there was an empty seat at the front of the class, right next to him. Perfect. I walked up to do my report and placed the cup on the open desk. Sure enough, as I started speaking, he reached for the cup. I tried to keep a straight face while dying inside. He took a big sip, and a few seconds later he screamed, fell out of his chair, and started rolling on the floor. The entire class stared in disbelief. I couldn't hold it in. I was laughing so hard I nearly had to stop my report. Story 20. Northern United States snow on the ground. Dead of winter. One of our co-workers at the local shop was a consistent jerk. He would constantly go out for smoke breaks, and rather than standing in the cold, he'd sit in his car. One day, another coworker came in with a cardboard box and a massive grin. Inside, 2 pounds, yes, 2 pounds of glitter. It came in several small plastic bags. I swear someone even said, "I have a plan." That coworker quietly slipped outside during the shift and returned with an empty box. Fast forward to lunchtime. The problem coworker heads out for a smoke. It wasn't snowing, but it was cold enough to see your breath. He gets into his car, and as the door closes, the engine starts. A few of us are watching from the break room window. What happened next was unreal. There was a loud scream, and suddenly the car looked like a swirling, screaming snow globe. Glitter came blasting out of the dashboard vents like a fireworks show of sparkly doom. The guy was howling inside, pure panic and rage. For about 3 seconds, his windshield looked like metallic paint being stirred. Only it was vertical and multicolored. Years later, literally years, he would come into the shop and still have glitter stuck to his clothes. Hair, hands, boots, you name it. Some of our friends still refuse to ride in his car, afraid they'll get fairy dust just by being near it. Story 21. My girlfriend had an iPod for about 3 years. One day it got remotely locked and she started getting messages saying it was stolen. Turns out she had unknowingly bought it from a guy who got it from a girl who had sold it for drug money. Then the girl's dad returned from military deployment and lost it. He began threatening my then 17-year-old girlfriend, claiming she had stolen the iPod. He even found her address through his Apple account since the iPod was still registered to him. My girlfriend would have gladly returned it for a refund. But this guy was unhinged. He threatened to show up at her house, screamed at her through messages, and just wouldn't calm down. It went on for about a week, and she was genuinely afraid. Eventually, she did some digging and figured out the full story, how the daughter sold it to fund her habit and how it ended up in my girlfriend's hands. But the father refused to believe it. To him, his daughter was an angel. They finally agreed. My girlfriend would leave the iPod at a Walmart customer service desk for him to pick up. What he found instead was an envelope containing only an iPod case and a letter. The letter explained that the real iPod was out in the parking lot underneath a car. He rushed to find it, but it was already destroyed, placed behind the tire of an SUV at the Bob Evans restaurant next door. Story 22. I once lived in an apartment with my best friend. It wasn't a nice place, but the price was right. Our neighbor on one side was a middle-aged woman with 2 sons, let's say around 13 and 16 years old. These boys had a goth look and were kind of odd, but they seemed like good kids. They were always outside sitting on our shared steps. After a while, we figured out why. Their mother was absolutely terrible to them. Through the thin walls, we could hear daily verbal abuse, constant yelling, name-calling, and emotional torment. We couldn't stand this woman. She was awful. Occasionally, we'd let the boys come in and play video games or just hang out for a few minutes if it was raining or too cold, just so they didn't have to go home. One night, my friend and I got drunk and somehow came across a freshly dead groundhog. This awful woman's car happened to be unlocked. It was some beat-up 1980s four-door. We gutted the groundhog and shoved it under her driver's seat. It was midsummer. You can imagine what happened next. The car didn't move for 3 or 4 days. Then one day it was gone. We never saw it again. We hadn't really thought through our drunken revenge, and unfortunately, a few days later, we heard her blaming one of the kids for it. She didn't go into much detail, and of course, the kids had no idea what had happened. This was years ago, and while I'm not proud of what we did, I still believe that woman was one of the cruelest people I've ever encountered. Story 23. I'm not sure if this counts as petty revenge or pro-revenge. Either way, it happened to me. In high school, there was a guy named Sandy. He was a friend of someone in my social circle, but I didn't like him. He was awkward, not mean, just socially off, and that made me uncomfortable. I treated him badly, even though he never did anything wrong. He just didn't fit in. Years later in university, someone close to me passed away, and I had to fly to their hometown for the funeral. I was in a fog, depressed and barely functioning for weeks afterward. When I returned, I landed at the airport with no one to pick me up and no way to get back to school, which was 2 hours away. I called everyone. Finally, I reached a friend who couldn't help but suggested that maybe Sandy could. And sure enough, Sandy dropped everything, picked me up, and drove me back to school. During the drive, we talked a little. He was the only person, not family, not close friends, who managed to say something genuinely comforting. Everyone else had tried, but Sandy's words actually made me feel better. That's when it hit me. I had been a jerk to this guy for no reason. He had always been kind, and I had treated him terribly. The guilt stayed with me. At the end of the ride, I offered him gas money, but he wouldn't take it. I don't think Sandy ever intended to get revenge, but in his own quiet way, he taught me a lesson I'll never forget. Story 24. When my ex and I broke up, we were still living together. My name wasn't on the lease, but I had paid for that month's rent. We agreed I would move out after that. I had already sensed the relationship was ending, so I wasn't too upset initially. She went out of town during the time I was supposed to move out. While she was gone, I kept hanging out with some mutual friends I had met through her, which apparently drove her crazy. Every time I hung out with them, I'd get texts like, "Did you have fun with blah and blah?" Then it escalated. She told me I wasn't allowed to hang out with her friends, and that if I did, I at least had to respond to all of her messages. I only replied to messages about our living arrangement, but she wanted more. This went on for about 2 weeks. Then she found out I had started spending time with another girl from her school. That's when she told me, despite the fact that I had already paid rent, I had 1 week to get out. I protested, but her response was, "She broke girl code, you hurt me, contracts change." Tracks. So when it came time for me to move out and she returned to town, I decided to get a little petty. I took every roll of toilet paper out of the apartment and made sure not to leave a single square behind for her or her family. Story 25. When I was a freshman in high school, I rode the school bus with both middle school and high school students. That year we had one kid on our bus, a real special snowflake, who just didn't understand how the bus worked. He would get on and try to sit with the high schoolers, and he constantly harassed the younger kids in an attempt to get our attention. He said disgusting, inappropriate things to the girls on the bus, thinking it made him look cool. I told him repeatedly that he wasn't being funny or impressive, just annoying and immature. But of course, instead of backing off, he doubled down. One day I was sitting quietly, listening to my CD player, trying to decompress from a rough day. But this kid kept going, saying things so disgusting and vulgar that 2 of the younger girls actually started crying. That's when I snapped. I got up, walked over to him, pushed him into his seat, and sat down beside him. I got in his face and calmly told him that if he ever harassed anyone on this bus again, he wouldn't be walking home. He'd be crawling after the beating he'd get. He looked nervous, but I don't think he believed I was serious. I stood up, told the girls to let me know if he so much as looked at them the wrong way, and went back to my seat. The next day, my parents received a call from the school. There was going to be a meeting involving both the middle and high school principals, the bus driver, the boy and his parents, and me and my parents. His parents were demanding I be suspended for harassing their son, and they weren't backing down. So I decided to take him down. At the meeting, the adults asked to hear each of our stories. I let the other kid go first. He rambled on about how I had been bullying him all year and how unsafe he felt on the bus. His performance ended with crocodile tears and a smug little smile, as if he'd just won. While he spoke, my dad took notes. At one point, the boy's father interrupted to ask what my dad was doing. My dad looked up and said, "I need accurate notes for our lawyer," and then calmly went back to writing. The boy's father scoffed and said, "You forget what your kid did to mine. I should be taking notes." When it was my turn, I asked when the school would be reviewing the bus footage. That year, the school had installed cameras on some buses, but not all. What most parents didn't know was that only 1 in 3 buses had functioning cameras. The others had dummy units. I had asked our driver early in the school year about ours, since I noticed the red light was never on. She confirmed it was a dummy unit. So when I asked about the footage, the administrators had to admit there wasn't any. I calmly told them I hadn't laid a hand on the kid, but admitted I did threaten him, and explained why. Then I pulled out my trump card. From my backpack, I took out 4 handwritten pages of quotes from students on the bus detailing what this kid had been saying to them since the start of school. I asked if I could read them aloud. The room agreed. After only a few quotes, the adults were so disturbed by the language and vulgarity that they told me to stop. Then I handed the middle school principal another list. Names of students willing to come forward with their parents to talk about the harassment. The boy burst into tears, sobbing so hard he couldn't speak. His father asked him directly if the things I said were true. The boy stammered, tried to deny it, then finally admitted it was all true. Then I looked him in the eye and asked him to also admit that he lied about me putting my hands on him. All he could say was, "Sorry, I lied about that too." In the end, the kid was kicked off the bus for the rest of the school year. His parents had to drive him to school every single day. And to this day, the look on his father's face when his son confessed is one of the most satisfying things I've ever seen. Story 26. A few years ago, I let my sister move in with me. It was fall and starting to get chilly outside. She kept turning the furnace on without asking anyone. In our house, we had a rule. Any big changes like that required a group vote. There were 5 of us living there at the time. I warned her multiple times to stop, or I'd make sure she regretted it. But she kept doing it. So I waited. One night, it dropped to about freezing, and I told all my roommates, except her, to grab extra blankets and use a space heater if needed. Then I flipped the breaker for the furnace. Sure enough, my sister woke up around 3 a.m. with numb toes, freezing cold. In the morning, she came to me complaining that the furnace was broken. I calmly told her it was working just fine. She was furious. I got phone calls from our parents shortly after. She ended up moving out about 3 weeks later. Problem solved. Story 27. There was a girl at school who constantly tried to ruin my reputation by calling me names behind my back while pretending to be my friend. I eventually cut her off and ignored her gossip. Until one day I snapped. She invited my long-term boyfriend, we'd been together for almost 2 years, over to her house while he and I were in the middle of a petty argument. That crossed the line. I completely lost it. I told him off and cut him out of my life. What I didn't know at the time was that she had been feeding him lies about me, which is what caused most of our fights in the first place. Months later, I remembered she was completely in love with this guy. Let's call him Jack. She would always talk about him, saying how he was the one and going on and on. I happened to remember his Instagram handle, so I followed him and liked a few of his pictures to see if he'd message me. Sure enough, he did. We met later that same day. A few weeks went by, and we made it official. We went on a proper date and posted our relationship on Facebook. That's when this girl had a total breakdown. She started threatening to harm herself and sent dramatic messages. Did I care? Not at all. Karma's real. And she deserved every bit of it. We're coming up on 6 months now, and I couldn't be happier. That petty decision turned into something unexpectedly beautiful. Story 28. I used to be best friends with this girl who would completely ignore me anytime she met someone new. It was like I stopped existing to her. One time we went on a trip together and met a group of girls. As usual, she ditched me and spent all her time with them, acting like they were lifelong friends. Then, when they weren't around, she'd start talking trash about them. One day, she went off to hang out with them again and forgot her camera in our hotel room. She kept bragging about it because it was expensive and had Wi-Fi or whatever. Not that I cared. I decided to hide it. One important detail. We were sharing the room with 2 other girls we didn't know very well. They seemed nice, but my best friend constantly called them low class and said they looked like thieves. I think she was just bitter because one of them complimented me when we were trying on swimsuits and said I looked good, while they told her she looked weird, skinny legs and a big belly. Their words, not mine. Anyway, when she got back and noticed her camera was missing, she freaked out. I pretended to help her look for it, and just as I was about to tell her it was a joke, the other girls walked in. She immediately turned around and started yelling at them. She accused them of stealing, screamed that she knew they were thieves from the start, and demanded we get different roommates because she refused to stay with poor, low-class people who steal. Things escalated quickly. Once everyone left the room, I placed the camera somewhere she could find it. The next day, she found it, but the tension in the room was unbearable. Everyone hated each other, except me. She thanked me for sticking with her, unlike her new friends who had gone off partying instead of helping her search. She spent the rest of the trip with me. That was 6 years ago. I never told her the truth, not even after I stopped being her friend. Story 29. During my freshman year of college, I was assigned to a group project with 4 girls who regularly sat together, gossiped nonstop, and didn't do a single bit of work. After 6 weeks of watching them contribute nothing, I decided I was done with group projects, and I wanted to make sure they paid for it. The assignment was supposed to be a short 15-slide presentation. I stayed up the 2 nights before it was due and turned it into a massive 60-slide monster. The plan was simple. Overload the presentation, then let them burn. I told the girls that I had done the slides and would present first, and then they could follow after me. They were so grateful and happy, which just made me even more angry at how little effort they had put in. So the day of the presentation comes. I go up and present my 6 slides, which contained all the actual information we needed, and then handed it off to them. They had no idea what was going on. They kept repeating things, rambling off-topic information, and struggling to move through slide after slide. They never made it to the end. I watched them flounder in real time, and it was glorious. After class, my professor pulled me aside and asked what was going on. I explained everything, and she told me she'd evaluate the project based on contributions. I got an A. The girls glared at me for the rest of the semester, and I just flipped them off every time. I don't know what grade they got, or if they had to redo the project, but I never worked with them again. Story 30. I went to a huge Oktoberfest celebration, and as is tradition, there weren't nearly enough porta potties for the size of the crowd. Most lines were 10 to 15 people long, and as we all know, after hours of drinking, everything eventually needs to go somewhere. So a few people from my group all lined up at the same time. The lines were moving decently, but when your bladder's full, even a decently moving line feels like forever, no matter how much you hop up and down trying to hold it. We finally got close to the front when this girl walked up. You know the type. Just attractive enough to get away with things, but not so attractive that it actually works long term. She started doing this cutesy sidewalk up to the front of the lines, trying to flirt her way ahead. She tried it with the guy in front of us, who shut her down immediately and told her the back of the line was way over there. She got irritated and walked over to her boyfriend to complain. As soon as one of the porta potties opened up, she ran inside laughing and saying, "Sorry, not sorry." Well, after waiting nearly 20 minutes, bladder bursting, watching this entitled move pushed us over the edge. My friends and I immediately started chanting, "What a ba! What a ba!" at the top of our lungs. A bunch of people nearby who saw what happened joined in. By the time she came out of the porta potty, it had become a full-on crowd reaction. There were plenty of FUs flying back and forth. Her boyfriend tried to de-escalate the situation, urging her to just walk away. He clearly didn't want to be dragged into anything and knew things could turn ugly with an angry drunk crowd. But she refused to let it go. That is, until she got hit square in the head with a soggy ball of paper towels, or possibly toilet paper, launched from somewhere near the porta potties. Everyone froze as she let out a blood-curdling scream. For a second, I actually felt bad for her. We were mad about the line cutting, sure, but I don't think anyone expected a potentially urine-soaked projectile to the face. Story 31. I used to work as a teller at a bank. My main role was to refer clients to bankers who handled the actual sales and account setups. Before that, I had been a banker myself at another institution, so I understood the entire process inside and out. I led the company in referrals and referred sales, and I had a strong reputation for connecting clients to the right services. There was a new banker at our branch who, for whatever reason, decided to be especially rude to me. She only showed respect when she thought someone could benefit her, and I guess she didn't think I qualified. One day I stopped by her office to check on a big referral I had sent her. She looked up and said, "You don't belong in my office. If I want to update you, I will." It wasn't out of character for her. She was always cold and dismissive. But this time it really struck me because I had a genuine concern for the client's experience. I just shrugged, walked away, and from that day on, I never sent her another client. It didn't matter if the other bankers were completely booked or if someone walked in looking for the next available appointment. She was done getting any business from me. And honestly, it wasn't even a loss for the clients. She was terrible at her job. I saw the look on people's faces as they left her office empty-handed, confused, and disappointed, never to return. She never figured out how to build her own book of business, and without my referrals, she posted 0 sales for weeks. Eventually, she became so overwhelmed by the pressure that she had a full-blown breakdown and quit. Meanwhile, the other bankers thrived. With the extra opportunities I passed their way, their numbers soared, and mine didn't drop a bit. Story 32. A couple of decades ago, I was renting a house in the Seattle area, and my landlord was a terrible property management company. We'd had many arguments, but when I moved out, I made sure to clean the entire house. Nothing had been damaged. Regardless, they decided to keep my $850 deposit and had the audacity to say I owed them an additional $10 for cleaning costs. At the time, I had just been the victim of a violent crime and had to move because of it. I'd also been hospitalized, and I didn't have the energy to fight about the $860. I was feeling completely overwhelmed. I took the first apartment I could afford, and it had cockroaches. I hadn't seen them during the walkthrough, But once I moved in, they were everywhere. I was devastated. It felt like everything in my life was crashing down. And then I got an idea. I started collecting cockroaches in a jar. After about a week, I had a decent amount of live ones. So I drove down to the property management office to pay the $10. In the lobby, the secretary asked what I needed, and I replied, "I think I owe you some money, but I'm not sure how much." Oh. She got up to go check my file, leaving me alone in the lobby. That's when I took the jar out of my backpack, opened it, and let the roaches scurry out onto the floor. Within seconds, they had vanished into the floorboards and behind furniture. The secretary returned and said, "Oh yes, you owe us $10. I smiled, paid the money, and walked out feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Story 33. I had a roommate who constantly pranked me. Booby traps, weird stunts, and he loved messing with my stuff. He even wore my clothes without asking, thinking I wouldn't notice. Revenge came one night after he came home from a long night of drinking and crashed in his bed. I had a couple of friends over and we came up with a plan. While he was passed out, we carefully lifted him, mattress and all, and carried him outside into the backyard. It was snowing. We let him lie there for about 5 minutes before we started throwing snowballs at him to wake him up. Even after being hit with snowballs, he was so drunk he just pulled the blanket tighter around himself and went back to sleep. About 2 hours later, he came pounding on the door, dragging his mattress behind him, freezing and confused. When he asked how he ended up outside, I told him he came home, announced he was going to build an igloo, and just took his bed and blankets out to the yard. He believed me. I laughed the entire way to work that morning. Story 34. Back in junior year of high school, I was sent to AEP, an alternative school version of out-of-school suspension. While I was there, I met this really cool girl, and we became fast friends. One day I took a sick day, and she texted me saying some guy had just been sent there and was acting creepy. Nothing too serious at first. He just wouldn't stop talking and sat way too close. She asked if I could sit with her the next day and act a little affectionate so he'd back off. Flash forward to the last period of the next day. I sat next to her, leaning in a bit to make it clear we were close. The guy came in and sat next to me. He was huge, at least 6'2" and really built. I'm 5'7", so it was kind of intimidating. He chatted me up for a bit. At first he just seemed annoying, but then he wouldn't stop talking. Even after the teacher handed out work and the class got quiet, he kept going, louder and louder. The teacher and students told him multiple times to be quiet, but he just kept talking. Then he made a snide remark about my friend, and that's when I decided to ruin his day. I started making little comments, baiting him, slowly pushing his buttons. Eventually, he snapped. He threw a book across the room, stood up, and came toward my desk, practically screaming. I couldn't help but laugh. He balled up his fist like he was going to hit me. But before he could, the teacher, who was even bigger than him, grabbed him and dragged him straight to the office. Now here's where it gets better. In AEP, leaving school is like kindergarten. They call your name and you don't move until it's your turn. My friend thanked me and left. Then they called my name. As I walked by the office, which had plexiglass walls, I saw him sitting there scowling. He mouthed something at me. I couldn't hear it. So I flipped him off with both hands and walked out to my mom's car. Suddenly I heard yelling. He burst out of the school, screaming that he was going to get me. He ended up getting into a fight with the cops who ran out to stop him. I found out later he got banned from the entire district and was sent to juvie for several months. Not especially proud of it, but hey, I got results. Story 35. A few years back, I was working at a video store. Back when those were still a thing. I was really close with my coworkers and supervisors. We all hung out outside of work, and it was great. Most nights after close, we just sit around and wait for everyone to finish up so we could go hang out together. One day, our shift leader, Bob, real name because Bob is my homeboy and I honestly don't care, got dumped by his toxic ex. We all hated her and thought it was a blessing she was gone. The problem was that Bob didn't take the breakup well at all. He became a total nightmare to work with. Angry all the time, snapping at everyone, just miserable to be around. We all sympathized at first, but it got old real fast. So I figured, if Bob was going to treat us like garbage for no reason, I'd at least give him an actual reason to be mad. It was a Friday night, almost closing time, and I got an idea. I went to the safe and exchanged every single dollar from all the tills for rolled coins. Then I went one step further. I unwrapped every single roll. My coworkers thought it was hilarious. We all brought our heavy coin-filled tills to the office for Bob to count, while we quickly ran back to the front to watch what would happen. Bob walks into the office. We all hold our breath in silence. Less than a minute later, the swearing starts. Bob is absolutely furious. He storms out of the office and starts yelling at all of us. I stepped forward and admitted it was me. He picked up a DVD and sidearmed it toward me. It missed my head by inches. I was in tears from laughing so hard. Eventually, we all helped him count the money, and we left for the night. Bob didn't talk to me for about a week. Then one day he apologized for trying to ninja star me with a DVD case. I told him my logic. I figured if I could get him angry enough, maybe he'd finally snap out of his post-breakup slump. Surprisingly, he thanked me. Petty acts can sometimes be used for the greater good. Story 36. Why am I always late to these threads? Anyway, I posted this in a similar one a while ago, but here it is again. I used to work at a video store years ago. I was one of 3 assistant managers. The other 2? They were seriously creepy, always trying to flirt with the underage employees. It was uncomfortable and everyone knew it. One of the guys always claimed he had a girlfriend, though no one ever saw her. But apparently she was real, because one day he came in all mopey and told us she'd broken up with him. At the front of the store, we had a discount bin filled with old videos. One of them was a workout video called something like Get Fit with Denise. Turns out that was the name of his ex-girlfriend. I only learned this after I caught him quietly moving the video to the back of the bin, muttering under his breath about it. From that moment on, I made it my mission. Every time he wasn't around, I moved the video back to the front of the bin, so her name was clearly visible. He would always move it back. I'd move it again. This went on for a while, and honestly, it was the only thing that made that job even remotely fun at times. I can't remember how long it lasted, but it gave me something to look forward to every shift. Story 37. Back in high school in the mid-90s, when pagers were still a thing, I had a buddy who was kind of a genius and a bit of a mad scientist. We were both into programming and computers and had a blast figuring things out. He wrote this program called a war dialer, like in the movie War Games. His version would call random numbers in the area, looking for modem signals. But he added a twist. It could also identify pager numbers from local exchanges and use them for a prank we called the pager bomb. Here's how it worked. He'd grab random pager numbers from want ads, then run his war dialer to figure out which numbers were part of the same block leased by a pager company. Hundreds, sometimes thousands of them. Then if someone annoyed him, he'd program the dialer to send a page to every number in that block, but list the target's home phone number as the callback. So every person in the block would get one random, wrong number page. Meanwhile, the kid who pissed him off, their phone would ring nonstop for hours with people calling back, confused and irritated. It was like a human-powered DDoS attack. One guy who picked on him at school got hit so badly, his mom unplugged the phone from the wall. When she plugged it back in the next morning, it was still ringing. They had to leave it unplugged for 3 days. They called the phone company, of course. But my friend had rigged a payphone with a wireless transmitter that let him send out pulse codes, basically free, untraceable calls. The phone company never figured it out. And that guy never messed with my friend again. Story 38. Probably me against my dad. He was a real control freak and obsessed with us kids being disciplined, focused, and obedient so we could have good lives. He felt so strongly about it that he'd fly into a rage every few days whenever I inevitably slipped up. So I took my petty revenge by purposely messing up, always in ways that I knew would really grind his gears. It was like a cycle. The more frustrated he got, the more driven I became to push his buttons. It started to turn very ugly. I know this might seem like a strange way of coping, but when you're a shy kid without a voice or power in your life, you find other ways to be heard. The revenge became more frequent and intense. He cared about me, and I loved him in some twisted way, but I also hated him, vehemently, especially after his violent or irrational outbursts. In those cold, quiet moments after he'd lost it, I would get my revenge. I remember slightly turning on the faucet in the kitchen to drip overnight onto a stack of printed documents he had for his business. I killed the best plants he had grown in the garden, 100 more little things. But it didn't stop there. I started taking out that cold rage on 2 other kids at school. and also on myself. The biggest act of revenge, though, came years later, after I finally gained freedom from his control.